The morning had started like any other in the busy city neighborhood. People were going about their daily routines, children were walking to school, and local shops were opening their doors for another day. The streets were alive with the usual sounds of traffic, chatter, and occasional sirens from far away. In the midst of this ordinary day, a local police officer, known for being very strict and uncompromising, began his routine patrol. He had a reputation for being firm and very confident in his decisions, sometimes to the point where his colleagues worried about him crossing lines. On this particular morning, the officer noticed a small crowd gathered near a popular community center. There were people talking loudly, some laughing, and others looking upset. From a distance, it seemed like a minor disagreement had started among a few individuals. The officer drove closer to see what was happening, expecting a simple situation that he could handle quickly. Little did anyone know that what started as a small incident would soon turn into something far more serious. As he approached, the officer saw a woman standing in the middle of the commotion. She appeared calm but firm, trying to explain something to the crowd that had gathered around her. Her voice carried over the chatter, and it was clear that she was trying to get people to listen. The officer, however, saw only a rule being broken, a disruption that needed to be stopped immediately. Without fully understanding the situation, he got out of his vehicle and walked towards her. The woman noticed the officer approaching and immediately straightened her posture. She did not seem afraid, but she was aware that this could become tense quickly. The crowd began to shift, sensing that the encounter could escalate. The officer addressed her directly, speaking in a loud and commanding voice. He told her that she needed to stop what she was doing and follow his instructions. The woman responded politely but firmly, trying to explain that she had not done anything wrong. She mentioned that she was merely speaking to the group and that no laws were being broken. Instead of listening to her explanation, the officer became more insistent. He raised his voice, telling her that she was causing a scene and that she needed to be punished for her actions. The crowd began to murmur, some people recording the incident on their phones, while others shouted warnings to the officer. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone could sense that the situation was about to get out of hand. At this point, the officer made a decision that would change everything. He told the woman that she needed to have her hair cut as a consequence for defying him. The woman was shocked and confused. She tried to explain that cutting her hair was not necessary and that she had not done anything to deserve such a punishment. But the officer ignored her protests, insisting that this was the only way to make her understand the seriousness of the situation. People in the crowd started to react more strongly. Some shouted at the officer to stop, while others tried to pull the woman away from him. The woman was frightened but also determined to stand her ground. She knew that what was happening was wrong, but she also realized that resisting too much could escalate things even further. The officer, however, was relentless. He seemed to believe that he was doing the right thing and that no one could stop him. The officer grabbed a pair of scissors from his belt, a tool that was always kept nearby for emergencies or unusual situations. The crowd gasped as they saw him holding the scissors, and many began to record the moment on their phones. The woman pleaded with him to stop, explaining that cutting her hair would be humiliating and unnecessary. She begged him to think about the consequences of his actions. But the officer was convinced that this was a disciplinary measure that needed to be enforced immediately. With little hesitation, the officer began to cut her hair. The woman flinched, feeling the sharp snips against her scalp. Her voice trembled as she cried out in shock and fear. The crowd reacted loudly, some shouting at the officer to stop, while others tried to intervene physically. But the officer held firm, focused on completing what he believed was his duty. The woman's hair fell to the ground in small clumps, and she felt a deep sense of humiliation and anger throughout the ordeal. The officer showed no awareness of the woman's personal identity or the potential repercussions of his actions. To him, she was just someone who had broken a rule and needed to be punished. The woman, on the other hand, was experiencing a moment that would have a lasting impact on her life. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and completely powerless in that moment. The crowd continued to watch, some recording every detail for social media. others unable to look away from the shocking scene. Once the officer finished, he stepped back, satisfied that he had enforced what he considered justice. The woman's face was a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. She ran her fingers through her now short hair, feeling the sting of both the physical and emotional impact. The crowd around them began to react even more strongly. Some people shouting at the officer, others comforting the woman, and a few calling local news stations to report what had just happened. As the officer walked back to his patrol car, he believed he had done his job. He thought that by enforcing discipline, he had prevented future incidents and maintained order. He did not realize that this single action would trigger a wave of attention far beyond anything he could have imagined. The woman's identity, which he had ignored or perhaps not even considered, would soon make the incident far more serious. The woman, now surrounded by supporters from the crowd, tried to collect herself. She was shaken, but she knew that the story did not end there. She needed to make sure that what had happened would be recognized as a serious violation of personal rights. People continued to record the aftermath, capturing her expressions of disbelief and the scattered clumps of her hair on the ground. The images and videos would soon spread online, igniting outrage and debate. By midday, the story had reached local news channels. Reporters arrived on the scene to interview witnesses and get first-hand accounts of what had happened. The videos taken by bystanders were shared widely, sparking outrage across the city and even attracting attention from national media. Social media platforms were filled with comments, some condemning the officer's actions, others questioning why such a severe response had been taken for what seemed like a minor incident. The woman was eventually taken to a safe location by concerned friends and neighbors. She was overwhelmed by what had happened, but also determined to take action. She knew that the incident was not just a personal attack, but also a matter of public concern. Her courage and composure, even in such a humiliating situation, began to draw support from people who had seen the videos and understood the injustice. Meanwhile, the officer returned to the police station, confident that he had acted correctly. He explained the situation to his superiors, who were initially hesitant but ultimately did not intervene immediately. The internal tensions within the department were growing, as some officers were disturbed by what had occurred and others quietly agreed with the strict enforcement approach. The situation was becoming increasingly complex, with the potential for serious professional and legal consequences looming on the horizon. The rest of the day was filled with heated discussions, both in the neighborhood and within the police department. People debated the morality of the officer's actions, the boundaries of authority, and the treatment of individuals in public spaces. The incident had sparked a conversation about the balance between law enforcement and personal rights, and it became clear that this was only the beginning of a much larger story. By evening, the woman's story had gained momentum online, with thousands of people expressing support and outrage. She became a symbol of standing up against unnecessary and humiliating punishment, and her courage inspired others to speak out about their own experiences. The officer, on the other hand, began to feel the weight of public scrutiny, though he still believed that he had acted within his authority. As night fell, the neighborhood settled into an uneasy quiet. The incident had left a mark on everyone who had witnessed it, and the repercussions were only beginning to unfold. The officer would soon learn that actions taken without understanding the full context could have consequences far beyond what he had imagined, and the woman's life would be forever changed by a single, shocking decision. The story was far from over, and what had happened that morning would soon reach levels of attention, accountability, and revelation that no one could have predicted. The day after the shocking incident, the neighborhood was buzzing with conversation. People who had witnessed what happened the day before could not stop talking about it. Parents told their children to be careful, shopkeepers discussed the events with regular customers, and the incident had already spread far beyond the streets where it had taken place. Social media was filled with videos and comments as people shared what they had seen. Many expressed outrage, condemning the officer's actions and demanding accountability. The woman, still shaken from the previous day, spent the morning surrounded by friends who wanted to support her. They had helped her leave the scene safely the day before, and now they worked to make sure she felt protected. She was still in shock about the public humiliation and the suddenness of what had occurred, but her friends encouraged her to speak out. They reminded her that she had done nothing wrong and that her courage could inspire others. News crews had arrived in the neighborhood, eager to cover the story. The videos that had gone viral were being played repeatedly, with commentators describing the situation in detail. Experts on social behavior and law enforcement began weighing in, discussing the importance of boundaries, the dangers of excessive authority, and how minor incidents could escalate into serious violations of personal rights. The woman's story quickly became a symbol of the broader issue of abuse of power in the community. The woman herself decided to give an interview. She spoke carefully, choosing her words to convey the fear and humiliation she had experienced without anger overtaking her message. She described the shock of having her hair cut without consent, the sense of vulnerability she felt in front of the crowd, and the disbelief she had experienced when the officer refused to listen to her explanations. Her calm yet firm voice captured the attention of viewers and readers alike. People were moved by her composure and her determination to tell the truth. Meanwhile, the officer faced mounting pressure from both the public and his colleagues. Some officers privately expressed concern that the situation had gone too far, while others remained silent, unwilling to challenge a fellow officer. Internal emails and messages began circulating, questioning the decision to carry out such a severe punishment for what had been a minor dispute. His superiors had not yet taken decisive action, and this hesitation fueled further criticism from the community. As the day progressed, community leaders stepped in. Local advocacy groups organized meetings to discuss how to address the situation and prevent similar incidents in the future. They encouraged residents to remain calm but to demand accountability, emphasizing that public pressure could lead to meaningful change. The woman attended some of these gatherings, finding strength in the collective support around her. She realized that her personal experience had become part of a larger conversation about justice, fairness, and the treatment of civilians by law enforcement. Social media continued to amplify the story. Hashtags began trending, calling for an investigation and highlighting the woman's bravery. Memes and posts showed solidarity, with people sharing images and messages of support. The officer, who had once been confident in his actions, now found himself the target of widespread criticism. His name and image were circulating online, and he began to understand that public opinion could have serious consequences. The woman also began to receive support from unexpected places. Individuals who had experienced similar situations reached out, sharing their own stories of harassment or abuse. She realized that her experience, though deeply personal, was not unique. Many people have faced moments of humiliation and injustice, and her willingness to speak out was helping others find their voices. This growing sense of community strengthened her resolve to pursue accountability and ensure that no one else would have to endure the same treatment. As pressure mounted, the police department was forced to respond. A formal statement was issued, acknowledging the incident and promising a thorough investigation. The statement was carefully worded, emphasizing the importance of protocol and the department's commitment to fairness and transparency. While it did not yet address disciplinary measures, it signaled that the department was taking the matter seriously. Largely due to public outrage and media attention, legal advisors began reviewing the case, assessing whether the officer's actions had violated any laws or regulations. The woman was encouraged to document everything she remembered about the incident, including the officer's words, his gestures, and the reactions of bystanders. This record would be crucial in any formal investigation or legal proceedings. She worked diligently, determined to ensure that her story was told accurately and that her experience would be taken seriously. The emotional impact on the woman was significant. She struggled with feelings of anger, embarrassment, and fear. Simple tasks, like walking down the street or visiting her regular stores, felt daunting. People stared, whispered, or asked questions about what had happened. Despite these challenges, she remained committed to moving forward and advocating for herself and others. Her resilience became an important part of her narrative, inspiring those around her. and capturing the attention of the broader public. Community meetings and public forums continued throughout the week. Residents, activists, and legal experts came together to discuss what had happened and how to prevent similar incidents in the future. They debated issues such as police training, the use of authority, and the importance of respecting personal rights. The woman attended these forums whenever possible, listening, asking questions, and sharing her perspective. Her participation highlighted the personal stakes of the situation and reminded everyone that these issues affected real people, not just abstract concepts. Meanwhile, the officer began to face scrutiny within his department. Internal reviews were underway, and colleagues who had previously admired his strict enforcement style began to question his judgment. Some officers were concerned about the negative impact on the department's reputation, while others worried about the legal implications. The officer, once confident in his authority, now found himself isolated and unsure of how to defend his actions. The realization that his behavior had serious consequences began to weigh heavily on him. Public discussions also focused on the role of social media in amplifying incidents like this. Experts pointed out that while the videos had spread quickly, they had also helped bring attention to an important issue. The woman's story was no longer confined to the neighborhood. It had become a national conversation about power, accountability, and human dignity. People debated the responsibility of both law enforcement and civilians, discussing how communities could work together to prevent abuses of authority. The woman received messages of support from across the country. Strangers wrote to her, expressing empathy and encouragement. Advocacy organizations reached out to offer assistance and guidance. She realized that her experience had connected her to a larger network of people who cared about justice and fairness. This support helped her feel less alone and gave her the courage to continue speaking out despite the emotional challenges. The officer, on the other hand, experienced increasing stress and anxiety. He was no longer able to view the incident as a simple enforcement action. He began to understand that his lack of awareness of the woman's identity and the broader consequences of his actions had created a situation far more serious than he had anticipated. Calls from his superiors, questions from colleagues, and the growing public scrutiny left him feeling trapped and uncertain about the future. By the end of the week, it was clear that the incident would not be forgotten. The woman's story continued to gain attention, and discussions about accountability, authority, and personal rights remained in the public eye. Community leaders, media outlets, and legal experts emphasized the importance of learning from the situation and implementing changes to prevent similar incidents. The neighborhood, once focused on daily routines and ordinary concerns, now had a collective sense of responsibility to ensure that such a violation of personal dignity would not happen again. The woman began to reflect on the experience, acknowledging the pain and humiliation but also recognizing the strength she had shown. She realized that her story had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for one's rights. While the incident had been deeply personal, it had also sparked a broader conversation about fairness, respect, and the proper use of authority. As part 2 of this story closes, the stage is set for the next chapter. The woman's growing visibility, the officer's mounting consequences, and the community's response are all leading to revelations that will further change the course of events. The incident has moved from a private act of humiliation to a public symbol of accountability. And everyone involved is beginning to understand that the consequences of a single moment can extend far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The tension in the city had reached a new level. The woman's story, which had already gained widespread attention, took a sudden turn that no one had anticipated. In the middle of the week, during the course of the internal investigation, it was discovered that the woman was not an ordinary citizen as the officer had assumed. Her identity had connections to prominent figures in law enforcement leadership. This revelation immediately changed the stakes of the situation. News of the woman's identity spread quickly, and the public reaction was intense. People who had previously been outraged now felt a mixture of shock and curiosity. The officer, who had believed he was enforcing the rules on a routine basis, now faced scrutiny that extended beyond local media and social platforms. Legal and political authorities became involved. Recognizing that the incident could no longer be treated as a minor misstep, the woman, learning that her identity had suddenly made the incident even more serious, was surprised by the attention. She had never sought public recognition, only justice and accountability for what had been done to her. Yet she realized that this revelation gave her a stronger position to demand answers, and to ensure that the officer's actions would be examined thoroughly. Her friends and supporters rallied around her, offering guidance and comfort as she navigated the sudden surge of media coverage and public interest. The officer, meanwhile, began to understand the gravity of his mistake. What had initially seemed like a minor enforcement action now appeared as a potentially career-ending incident. He had not considered that the woman might have connections or that his actions could provoke responses from higher authorities. The realization that the situation was escalating rapidly left him anxious and uncertain as he tried to anticipate the consequences. Internal affairs within the police department ramped up their investigation. Officers and supervisors reviewed the footage from the incident, examined witness accounts, and analyzed the officer's conduct step by step. They were particularly focused on whether proper procedures had been followed and whether the officer's actions were justified under any circumstance. It became clear that he had overstepped his authority, and the department began preparing for a formal report and possible disciplinary actions. The woman, while emotionally drained, prepared to take her story to higher authorities. She worked with legal advisors to document every detail, ensuring that her account was accurate and consistent. She described the officer's behavior, the sequence of events, and the emotional impact of having her hair forcibly cut. Her testimony, combined with the videos from bystanders, created a compelling record of misconduct. She understood that her voice could influence not just the outcome for herself, but also the broader conversation about police accountability. Public opinion was increasingly divided. Many people expressed outrage at the officer's lack of judgment and the severity of his actions. Others debated the responsibility of civilians in confrontations with law enforcement. The revelation of the woman's identity added another layer to the discussion, with some questioning whether her status had amplified the response unfairly. Nonetheless, the incident sparked conversations about power dynamics, the limits of authority, and the need for ethical enforcement practices. As media coverage intensified, journalists sought interviews with both the woman and the officer. The woman, now a symbol of resilience, spoke eloquently about the importance of respect, fairness, and accountability. Her message resonated with viewers across the country, inspiring discussions about how citizens and law enforcement can interact in ways that protect dignity and rights. The officer, however, struggled to respond. Public statements he attempted to make were carefully scrutinized, and he quickly realized that any misstep could worsen his situation. The legal implications became more pronounced. Advisors reviewed statutes regarding harassment, misuse of authority, and civil rights violations. They determined that the officer's actions could be seen as an abuse of power, and formal complaints were filed with the appropriate authorities. The woman, guided by her legal team, prepared for potential hearings and statements, aiming to ensure that the process would lead to accountability rather than simply fading into public memory. The officer's personal life began to feel the impact as well. Friends, family, and colleagues reached out, some offering support and others expressing disappointment or concern. He experienced sleepless nights, anxiety, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. For the first time, he realized that his actions had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate incident and could permanently affect his career and reputation. Community leaders continued to engage with the situation. Meetings were held to discuss the implications of the incident and to advocate for changes in policies and training. The focus was not just on punishing one officer, but on addressing systemic issues and ensuring that similar situations could be prevented in the future. The woman's story became central to these discussions, highlighting the human impact of unchecked authority and the importance of clear protocols. Social media remained a powerful force in shaping public perception. People shared the videos, commented on news articles, and debated the ethical dimensions of the incident. Memes and posts emphasized accountability, justice, and the courage it took for the woman to stand up for herself. The officer, once confident in his approach, now faced the full weight of public opinion and its potential influence on official investigations. The woman's emotional journey was complex. She experienced relief that her story was being taken seriously, but also struggled with the stress of public attention and the pressure to navigate legal and social challenges. Despite these difficulties, she remained committed to her principles, determined to ensure that the focus remained on accountability and justice rather than sensationalism or gossip. The officer, for his part, began to participate in internal interviews and provide statements about the incident. He attempted to explain his perspective, emphasizing his belief that he was enforcing rules and maintaining order. However, it became increasingly clear that his lack of judgment and awareness had created a situation that could not be easily justified. Each interview added to the record of the investigation, highlighting the gap between intention and consequence. By the end of the week, the incident had become a national story. News outlets, online platforms, and social media users continued to follow developments closely. Discussions about police accountability, individual rights, and ethical enforcement were widespread. The woman's courage and composure became a focal point, demonstrating that standing up for oneself in the face of injustice could lead to meaningful dialogue and change. The officer's career hung in the balance. With internal reports, public scrutiny, and legal considerations, he faced an uncertain future. Colleagues and supervisors debated potential outcomes, considering factors such as disciplinary measures, retraining, or possible termination. He was confronted with the reality that one moment of misjudgment could overshadow years of service, and that professional reputation and public trust were fragile and easily damaged. The woman, meanwhile, focused on recovery and advocacy. She sought support from friends, legal advisors, and community groups, ensuring that her experience would contribute to larger conversations about justice and fairness. Her identity, previously unknown to the officer, had now become a critical element in holding him accountable and highlighting the importance of respect, human dignity, and careful judgment in positions of authority. As part 3 of the story comes to a close, the situation has evolved dramatically from a seemingly minor incident into a significant public and legal matter. The woman's identity has amplified the impact. The officer faces serious professional consequences, and the community is engaged in dialogue about accountability and ethics. The next phase will reveal how legal proceedings, public pressure, and personal reflection converge to determine the outcome and shape the lessons learned from this extraordinary incident. The atmosphere in the city grew heavier as the investigation into the officer's actions continued. Days had passed since the incident, but the tension was far from over. Both the woman and the officer were caught in a whirlwind of attention, scrutiny, and legal processes that seemed to expand every hour. What had started as a shocking, yet isolated moment had now grown into a major issue affecting the lives of everyone involved. The woman, despite the trauma she had endured, was determined to ensure that justice was served. She had spent hours with her legal team, reviewing every detail, creating a timeline, and preparing her testimony. She knew that being thorough and precise was essential. Each piece of evidence mattered: the videos recorded by bystanders, witness statements, and even her own recollections of the officer's words and actions. She approached the situation with a careful mix of courage and strategy, determined not to let fear or humiliation silence her. Public interest in the story continued to rise. News channels ran repeated segments on the incident, highlighting the brutality of the act and the officer's apparent lack of awareness about the woman's identity. Talk shows debated the case, discussing not only the personal consequences for both parties, but also the broader implications for law enforcement practices. Social media was flooded with messages of support for the woman, as well as calls for strict accountability measures for the officer. The videos and commentary had reached audiences nationwide, turning a local incident into a conversation that demanded attention at every level. Inside the police department, the officer faced growing pressure. Colleagues and supervisors met frequently to discuss the ongoing investigation, weighing the potential outcomes and preparing statements. The officer was required to provide detailed accounts of his actions, answer questions about his judgment, and explain why he had chosen to enforce such a severe measure. Each meeting added to his stress and anxiety. He realized that his career, once stable and respected, was now hanging by a thread. With the possibility of termination looming over him, community members and activists continued to organize events and forums to discuss the incident. These gatherings aimed to bring together residents, legal experts, and law enforcement officials to explore how such situations could be avoided in the future. The woman participated whenever she could, offering her perspective and emphasizing the human impact of misconduct. Her story highlighted not just the immediate emotional and physical harm, but also the long-term consequences for public trust and community safety. Legal proceedings began to take shape. Complaints filed against the officer prompted an official review by both internal and external authorities. The focus was on whether his actions violated civil rights, abuse of authority, or departmental rules. Lawyers discussed the likelihood of various outcomes, from formal disciplinary actions to potential criminal charges. The woman prepared for possible hearings, knowing that her detailed documentation and the video evidence would play a crucial role in achieving accountability. Despite the intensity of the situation, the woman found moments of strength. Friends and family provided emotional support, reminding her of her resilience and courage. She also connected with advocacy groups that offered guidance and practical assistance, including public speaking opportunities and strategies for navigating the legal system. These interactions helped her regain a sense of control, transforming the trauma into a platform for advocacy and education. The officer, in contrast, felt increasingly isolated. The public outrage, media scrutiny, and internal pressure were relentless. Every action he took seemed to be scrutinized for potential mistakes, and he began to doubt his own judgment. The realization that his single decision had caused widespread consequences weighed heavily on him. His colleagues offered limited support, some quietly sympathizing while others avoided contact altogether, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. As the investigation progressed, the community's focus shifted toward long-term solutions. Discussions about improving police training, implementing clear protocols for handling civilians, and emphasizing respect for individual rights became central themes. The woman's story was repeatedly referenced as a case study for how misjudgment and lack of awareness could escalate into serious incidents. She emerged not only as a victim seeking justice, but also as a key voice in shaping policy discussions and influencing systemic change. The officer's personal life was affected in unexpected ways. Friends and family expressed concern about his emotional state, and he began to experience stress-related health issues. Sleep became difficult, and he was haunted by the images of the incident and the knowledge that his actions were being replayed constantly online. The realization that public perception and professional consequences were intertwined added to his anxiety. He understood that regaining trust would be a slow and uncertain process. If it were possible at all, media outlets continued to follow the story closely. Interviews with the woman highlighted her courage, while reports on the officer focused on accountability and consequences. Experts analyzed the situation, discussing what should have been done differently and emphasizing the importance of training and ethical behavior in law enforcement. Public commentary, both online and in print, was filled with debate, reflecting the national interest and concern about the implications of the incident. Throughout this period, the woman maintained her focus on healing and advocacy. She worked to channel her anger and frustration into constructive action, participating in forums, speaking to journalists, and supporting initiatives aimed at preventing similar situations. Her dedication and composure inspired others who had experienced injustices, creating a sense of solidarity and collective effort to demand accountability from those in power. The officer faced increasingly formal consequences. Internal reports were finalized, detailing the sequence of events, witness accounts, and the implications of his actions. Recommendations for disciplinary measures were discussed, including suspension, retraining, and possible termination. The weight of the official findings made it clear that this incident was more than a temporary controversy. It had become a defining moment in his career, one that would shape his future in law enforcement. Community response remained active. Residents continued to hold discussions about policy reforms, accountability measures, and ways to rebuild trust between civilians and law enforcement. The woman's participation and visibility helped maintain focus on the human impact, emphasizing that individual experiences could drive meaningful change. The community recognized that addressing systemic issues required ongoing attention and collective action, and the incident became a catalyst for broader conversations about justice and fairness. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the consequences of the officer's actions were extensive. The woman had not only survived a traumatic event but had also become a symbol of courage and advocacy. Her efforts ensured that the incident was not dismissed or forgotten, while the officer faced the reality of professional, legal, and social repercussions. Both individuals were forever changed, and the community as a whole had been forced to confront questions about authority, respect, and the importance of ethical behavior in positions of power. As Part 4 concludes, the story has shifted from immediate shock and outrage to formal investigations, community activism, and personal reflection. The woman's pursuit of justice and the officer's reckoning highlight the complexities of accountability and the lasting effects of a single moment of misjudgment. The next part will bring the resolution, showing how lessons are learned, consequences are faced, and the path forward is shaped for everyone involved. The final chapter of this story began with a sense of resolution, though the journey to reach it had been long and emotionally taxing for everyone involved. The woman, having faced public humiliation, intense media scrutiny, and the emotional weight of her experience, was finally able to see progress in the quest for accountability. Her courage and persistence had turned a deeply personal ordeal into a catalyst for change. The officer, whose career had teetered on the edge of collapse, now faced the official consequences of his actions. Internal reports concluded that he had acted recklessly, failing to adhere to department protocol and demonstrating poor judgment. Recommendations for disciplinary action were formally issued, including suspension without pay, mandatory retraining, and the possibility of termination depending on the outcomes of additional reviews. The weight of these decisions was heavy, as he confronted the reality that his choices had damaged his reputation, strained professional relationships, and shaken the trust of the community he served. In the public sphere, the woman's story continued to resonate. News outlets highlighted her advocacy and determination to seek justice. Social media remained active with discussions about the importance of ethical behavior, personal accountability, and respect for human dignity. Her ability to maintain composure while speaking openly about the incident earned widespread admiration, inspiring others who had faced similar violations of trust or authority. She was no longer seen only as a victim. She had become a symbol of resilience and courage, a person who could turn personal hardship into meaningful action. Community meetings and forums held over the past weeks began to show tangible results. Local leaders worked with law enforcement agencies to review training practices, establish clear guidelines for interactions with civilians, and create accountability systems that would prevent similar incidents from occurring. These reforms emphasized respect, communication, and the careful exercise of authority. The woman's experience was frequently cited as a case study, underscoring the real-life consequences of misjudgment and the importance of human-centered decision-making in positions of power. The woman herself continued to participate actively, offering her perspective in a calm, measured way. She described the emotional and physical impact of the incident, emphasizing that no one should ever feel powerless or humiliated in public spaces. Her advocacy was grounded in practical recommendations, such as improved conflict resolution training for officers, better community engagement, and transparent mechanisms for reporting misconduct. She worked closely with legal advisors, community leaders, and advocacy groups to ensure that her story would have a lasting impact. Meanwhile, the officer struggled with feelings of guilt and regret. He reflected on the choices he had made, the assumptions he had held about the woman's identity, and the consequences of his actions. Friends and colleagues offered mixed support, some encouraging him to learn from the experience, others distancing themselves from the controversy. He realized that regaining trust would require more than formal measures. It would require a genuine transformation in his approach to authority, empathy, and ethical responsibility. Legal proceedings concluded with a clear message: misuse of authority and disregard for individual rights would not be tolerated. The officer faced formal disciplinary action, and while he accepted the outcome, he also understood that rebuilding his career, if possible, would be a long and challenging process. The woman, meanwhile, achieved a sense of closure. Her courage had not only led to justice for herself, but had also contributed to broader reforms that would benefit countless others. The broader community felt the effects as well. Residents noted that discussions about accountability and fairness had become more prominent, and local law enforcement agencies demonstrated increased awareness of the need for respectful interactions. Community members who had once been frustrated or fearful now felt empowered to voice concerns, knowing that public oversight and advocacy could lead to meaningful change. The incident had sparked an ongoing dialogue that strengthened relationships and built trust over time. Emotionally, the woman experienced a mix of relief and continued resilience. She knew that the incident would remain a part of her life story, but she also recognized the growth that had come from facing it head-on. She had learned to navigate public attention, communicate effectively with authorities, and use her experience to help others. The process had been difficult, but it had also revealed her strength and determination. For the officer, the journey was more somber. He faced the challenge of reconciling his actions with his values, acknowledging mistakes, and considering how to move forward. He participated in counseling and professional development programs designed to improve judgment, empathy, and conflict resolution skills. While the public perception of him remained critical, he understood that personal accountability and reflection were essential steps in attempting to rebuild trust, both professionally and personally. The lessons of the incident became a central theme for local schools, community centers, and civic organizations. Educators and community leaders used the story to teach about the importance of empathy, ethical decision-making, and the consequences of actions. Workshops and discussions emphasized communication skills, conflict resolution, and the human impact of authority. The woman's story became a tool for positive change, inspiring future generations to value fairness, justice, and respect. In the end, the incident that had started as a shocking act of humiliation evolved into a story of resilience, accountability, and reform. The woman's courage and advocacy ensured that her experience would not be ignored, while the officer's reckoning highlighted the importance of ethical behavior and self-awareness. The community, having witnessed the unfolding events, emerged stronger, more informed, and more committed to principles of justice and dignity. The final resolution brought a sense of balance. The woman had achieved a measure of justice and had contributed to meaningful change. The officer faced the consequences of his actions and began a path of reflection and growth. The community had learned valuable lessons about accountability, communication, and the human impact of authority. While the incident would never be forgotten, it had led to positive outcomes that extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. As the story closed, the focus was on the power of courage, the necessity of accountability, and the importance of human dignity in every interaction. The woman's experience became a lasting example of how adversity, when met with resilience and determination, could lead to meaningful reform. The officer's experience served as a reminder that authority carries responsibility and that every action has consequences. The community, strengthened by awareness and engagement, moved forward with a renewed commitment to fairness, respect, and justice, ensuring that the lessons of this extraordinary incident would resonate for years to come.